questions from you? Yes, ma'am.
I was very interested in the primary document that was a runaway slave advertisement. And I've done a little bit limited research on advertisements. And I wondered if anyone else who's worked with them, like yourself, has noticed that the ones for male slaves are different than the ones for female slaves.
In what way?
Well, my primary interest is clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can see in this particular ad, he's very carefully described. And I know in my work, in the search for clothing details, when I find women mentioned in Runaway Slaves, they describe the woman, but they never say what she's wearing. And I don't know if anyone else has ever looked at them or picked this up.
South Carolina, in the Gazette, the South Carolina Gazette, they do, I know they describe the clothing.
Not really.
Oh, I've come across it.
Well, I think
Some may be, a man's writing the article describing women's clothes. What's my wife wearing? Something red. You know, it's not, you know, I could say it's a red gown, but I wouldn't say, I mean, now you can describe in detail.
I'll make two possible suggestions. One, who's writing the ad? It's the man. Secondly, in the 18th century, who was peacocking more than the women were? The men. And so it may be that there's a cultural construct that in some way changes and transitions as we move through time. And women are, but of course, there are a great number of women who are dressed in high style, and you see pictures and graphics of them all over in the 18th century. But I think that probably tradition had something to do with it. I mean, there were men who were simply walking down the streets, you know, and wanting everybody to see how dapper they looked, and how well they dressed even better than their wives did. But I agree with Fritz as well that you do find evidence in primary documents of women, but you certainly don't find as many as you do of men. And I think that was because men were more clothes hogs and style hogs then than we happen to be now. Wouldn't you say, bro? All right. You had a point?
Possibility. Isn't it true that there were more standard clothing sizes for men and more, you know, you could go to a store and buy men's clothes versus the women who are being provided materials, but they're making their own clothes so that it's easier to know what you gave a male slave, what their ration was versus what a woman's dress, final product ended up looking like.
Well, yeah.
Possible,
Yeah, that's possible. The other possible thing, too, is, especially during the American Revolution, you know, they put out the Townsend Act, where goods from England are not coming in. And so they're having to make domestic goods in ways that they haven't before. Most of these things that are high style are things that are coming from England and coming from other places. But they're stopping imports from coming in, and so they're having to make stuff out of linsey woolsey, stuff out of clothing that's here. And for most slaves, masters were buying bolts of cloth. They were buying it in bulk, and you look more like a soldier because everything looked the same. That's why when you go into the Caribbean or when you see blacks who are running away, like Dick, they are in some way accessorizing themselves to death because they want to look more unique and more standout than sort of having the same kind of uniform that the master is dressing most of his slaves in. Good question, though. Yes, Madam Elaine, then you.
You know, just in doing this exercise, it's been helpful to me because it creates some new thinking, and that is the importance of perspective. I don't know that I would have imagined that we could have gotten so many different interpretations for some of these pieces that you say, oh, stop here, let's look at this at last. You know, we must have 10 or 12 different perspectives. It made me think about the importance of having different people and outsiders look at your interpretations because they bring some different, some useful input to that. But it also makes me think about meaning and how that can be different given who we are and given who those people would have been in various time periods. And that's important to place it within the context.
Absolutely.
So that was all.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yes, sir.
I had a question. You know, oral histories are at the site where I have worked at. You know, we have them, and we always struggle with, you know, they are primary sources of a sort, but they're elusive. And weighing those, you know, how do you experience it? How you use oral history, you know, how you back it up with research and, you know, bring some pinnings to those, because they're ephemeral by nature, and they can change quickly.
If it looks like a skunk, feels like a skunk, smells like a skunk, walks like a skunk, talks like a skunk, it's a skunk. But in order to understand that, you have to do the research that supports that. It's nothing but central tendency. And I see nothing wrong with providing audiences with perspectives that show central tendency, that show assumptions, as long as that's what you say it is. It's when you say an assumption is fact that we got all kinds of problems. But I think what you do when you say, here is the perspective, or here is the interpretation. Now, we don't know. Here's what we know. And based upon what we know, here is what I have surmised based upon what I know. But it's simply an assumption based upon this evidence, based upon this. I think people appreciate that, because life is not black and white. And I think people understand the hues of gray. And I think they appreciate the hues of gray. And I think they appreciate historians who tell them that. I can't stand a historian who tells me that the only thing that he looks at is documentation that brings out the truth and nothing but the truth. We got to talk. Because there are shades of gray. Certainly there are some things that we can say we know existed because we have appropriate documentation. But I think that there is great engagement to be had in asking an audience to posit possibilities based upon the evidence that you have. And I think the learning that takes place is much greater than them sitting and listening to what you have to say, if you're a historian and you think that you're the only expert that lives. Any more comments? It's time to go. I thank you. I don't see a person who's gone to sleep. I don't see a person who seems bored. And if this was anywhere near adequate, I'll take half the blame, but I'll give you the other half, because I could not have done anything without you all. So thank you all very much.